My name is Natalie Pierce. I'm 31 years old, a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force, and the lead commander overseeing a joint federal defense project with Bright Corps Defense, a name that has shadowed my entire life. Tomorrow, I will sit at the head of a high-stakes defense meeting with final approval authority over Bright Corps' largest air defense contract to date. It's the kind of deal that shapes careers, the kind of decision that could redefine a company's future. My father and my brother both work there. They'll be in that meeting. They'll present strategies and push for approval, but they have no idea I will be the one with the power to say yes or no. 5 years ago, I walked out of this house for the last time, exhausted and hollowed out by the weight of their disappointment. I still remember my father's words echoing in the hallway. "You've betrayed your family's legacy." I chose the military over the corporate empire they had carefully carved for me. In their eyes, I was reckless, ungrateful, a daughter who abandoned her bloodline for something beneath her supposed potential. My brother Brandon was always the pride of the family, the natural heir to my father's defense empire. I was the blemish on an otherwise flawless lineage. Tonight, I'm coming back to this house not to make amends, not to seek forgiveness, but because tradition demands it. It's a family dinner celebrating Brandon's latest career triumph, a grand promotion that has the entire family buzzing. They will toast to his success. They will speak of him with reverence. They will ask me, out of polite obligation, whether I'm still moving around with the military. I will smile. I will let them believe I am exactly who they think I am: unimportant, distant, and directionless. But I know what they don't. Tomorrow, when I step into that boardroom in full uniform, when my rank and my name are called in front of CEOs and senior engineers, the story will shift in ways they cannot control. They will see me not the girl who left, not the soldier they dismissed, but the officer with final authority over the very project they've staked their reputations on. I've spent years preparing for this moment, not out of spite, but out of the quiet, deliberate pursuit of a life on my own terms. I have no intention of raising my voice tonight. I won't correct their assumptions. Let them have their moment, their illusions. I will sit at their table as if I don't matter. Because tomorrow, I won't need to say anything. My uniform will do all the talking. I didn't need to say anything. Tomorrow would speak for itself. As I stepped into the house, the same faint scent of lemon cleaner and old wooden cabinets greeted me like a memory frozen in place. The walls were still lined with the same family photos: Brandon's graduation, Brandon's promotion party, Brandon holding his first son. It was like I'd never existed here, at least not in any way that mattered to them. The house hadn't changed, but my place in it had quietly vanished, like an extra chair no one noticed was gone. From the kitchen, I heard my mother's voice light up with excitement as soon as I crossed the threshold. "Natalie, come in, dinner's almost ready. Brandon just got another award, you won't believe it." Her words landed like a feather, but the weight of them wasn't lost on me. She didn't come to the door to greet me. She didn't ask how I'd been. Her news about Brandon was her priority, not me. I walked into the kitchen, the same one where I'd sat as a child tracing the cracks in the linoleum while my father read the morning paper. "He's leading the orbital defense project now." She beamed, not noticing the subtle tightening in my jaw. "The whole company says he's destined for the top." The whole company. She meant Bright Corps. The company my father had spent his life serving. The company Brandon would one day inherit. The company that, tomorrow, would stand on the other side of the table from me without knowing who I really was. "That's great. Mom," I said, my voice steady, smooth, almost detached. "You'll congratulate him tonight, won't you?" she added, placing a serving dish on the table as if my approval still required prompting. I nodded politely. Of course, the dining room table was already set for 6, though no one had bothered with name cards. The hierarchy was implied. Brandon would sit at the head, Dad on his right, Mom between them. I would take a place somewhere along the side, an obligatory seat, not an essential one. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. Brandon and his wife, Michelle, arrived right on time. Just like always, Brandon wore the kind of blazer that screamed effortless success, and Michelle held a bottle of expensive wine that none of us truly enjoyed but would all pretend to savor. "Hey, Nat." Brandon greeted me as he gave me a brief, distracted hug. His attention was already drifting toward Dad. "It's been, 4 years?" "5," I corrected softly. He blinked, clearly uncertain whether I was joking. I wasn't. We settled into our usual places around the table. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, the same side salad my mother had been making since I was a teenager. It was a meal stuck in time. Brandon dominated the conversation effortlessly, detailing the aggressive growth strategies at Brightcore, the restructuring his team spearheaded, and, of course, the military contracts they were pursuing. "They're lucky to have you, son," my father said, his chest swelling with pride as he reached for the gravy boat. "Your leadership is making all the difference." Brandon chuckled modestly, waving off the compliment with performative humility. "It's a team effort, Dad. Though I did personally direct the new orbital response protocols. Pretty cutting-edge stuff." My mother beamed at him like he'd just discovered a cure for something. "And you, Natalie?" she asked, her voice pleasant but distant, as if I were a polite guest passing through. "Still moving around with the military logistics." Right, I took a sip of water. "Something like that. Must be tough," Brandon chimed in, his tone teetering between genuine curiosity and subtle condescension. "I mean, all that field work, no long-term strategy, just, following orders." There it was, that familiar phrase. Following orders, as if that's all I'd ever been capable of. I let the comment hang in the air, choosing not to correct him. There was a time when I would have pushed back, when I would have desperately tried to explain the scope of what I did, the weight of the decisions I made every day. But not tonight. Tonight wasn't for fighting. Tonight was for observing, for letting them paint their version of me with every assumption they clung to. Upstairs, my uniform hung perfectly pressed in the back of my suitcase, its silver oak leaves catching the faint morning light through the fabric. The insignia that would speak louder than I ever could. The rest of dinner played out like every family meal before it. Brandon's stories commanded the room. My father's eyes rarely drifted from his son. My mother occasionally glanced at me, but her questions never went deeper than surface pleasantries. They still didn't see me, but that was fine, because tomorrow, they would. They didn't see me last night, but this morning, they would have no choice. I arrived at Brightcore Defense 30 minutes ahead of schedule, pulling into the secured lot reserved for high-clearance personnel. The crisp navy blue of my Air Force uniform caught the early sunlight as I stepped out of my car, the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel glinting against the perfectly pressed fabric. I adjusted my cap, clipped my identification badge DoD Military Liaison, Level 5, clearance, and walked toward the security checkpoint with quiet purpose. The guards straightened as I approached. "Good morning, Colonel Pierce," one of them greeted, scanning my badge swiftly but with unmistakable respect. "Morning," I replied, nodding as I passed through. There was no hesitation in my steps. I had studied the building's layout weeks ago, memorized the flow of the executive floor, anticipated every doorway and pause point. I wasn't here to surprise them. I was here to execute my role. The elevator ride was smooth and silent, the kind that feels longer than it really is. As the doors slid open, the first person I saw was Brandon. He stood by the window, flipping through a sleek tablet, radiating the kind of casual authority that had always been effortless for him. He didn't see me at first. When his eyes finally lifted and caught mine, he froze. His jaw slackened just slightly, confusion flickering across his face as he scanned my uniform, as if his brain was struggling to reconcile the image in front of him with the sister he thought he knew. "Natalie." His voice cracked just enough to betray him. What are you doing here? What's this?" I didn't stop walking. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," I said, crisp and professional. my tone leaving no room for familiarity. "I'm here for the Bright Shield project review." Before Brandon could recover, my father's voice echoed from around the corner. "Brandon, we need to—" He appeared mid-sentence, flanked by two senior directors. His words died as his eyes landed on me. His gaze swept from my polished shoes to the insignia on my chest, then flickered nervously to the men beside him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. I saw the dawning realization spread across his features, slow, reluctant, but irreversible. The silence was broken by the firm footsteps of Evelyn Cross, the CEO of Brightcore Defense. She rounded the corner, caught sight of me, and immediately extended her hand with a warm, confident smile. "Colonel Pierce," she greeted. "I wasn't expecting you to attend in person. What an honor." I shook her hand firmly. I was in the area. Thought it would be valuable to join the review directly. "Absolutely. You elevate the room just by being here." She turned to the gathering executives and raised her voice slightly, ensuring everyone could hear. "For those who haven't yet been introduced, this is Lieutenant Colonel Natalie Pierce, Department of Defense Liaison and Command Lead for the Bright Shield project. She holds final approval authority for all federal integrations." It was like the air shifted instantly, like every sound in the hallway suddenly became sharper. I didn't glance at my father or Brandon. I didn't need to. Their silence told me everything. We entered the boardroom together. My name was already printed on a placard at the head of the table, beside Evelyn's. I took my seat, adjusted my notes, and let the other attendees file in one by one. Some were surprised by how young I was. A few clearly didn't expect the project's lead to be a woman, but no one asked twice, not after seeing the insignia on my uniform. Brandon and my father came in last, taking seats farther down the table, their previous confidence noticeably absent. The meeting started promptly at 9. "Let's begin," Evelyn announced. "I'd like to personally thank Colonel Pierce for joining us today. Her strategic oversight has already enhanced several key components of our defense protocols." I stood and addressed the room with calm authority, outlining the project's current milestones, detailed timelines, and the immediate corrections I expected to see implemented. I made direct eye contact with each speaker, asked pointed technical questions, and requested thorough documentation. When it was Brandon's turn to present, he stood slowly, visibly unsettled. "As the systems lead, I've developed a new rollout sequence for Phase 2, he began, but his voice faltered under the weight of the room's attention. "I believe it aligns with the required performance benchmarks." I let him finish without interruption, arms crossed, measured and steady. When he paused, I spoke, tone neutral but firm. "Mr. Harper." I addressed him formally, not as his sister but as his evaluating officer. "Could you clarify how your proposed method accounts for the latency thresholds specified in the latest DoD memo?" Brandon's eyes darted across his tablet. I can review that section again." "You'll need to," I replied. "Our security benchmarks are non-negotiable. Please revise the draft accordingly and submit the updated documentation by close of business Thursday." He swallowed hard, then nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." The room held its breath for just a second before the meeting continued. But everything had changed. I moved on without missing a beat, leading the next discussion as though nothing had happened. But Brandon knew. My father knew. And they would never unsee it now. The meeting moved on, but everything between us had already shifted. The formalities were over, but the real confrontation was just beginning. As the room gradually emptied and the final handshakes were exchanged, I noticed my father lingering just outside the glass walls of the boardroom. His posture was rigid, his expression unreadable, but his presence was deliberate. He didn't leave. He was waiting for me. When I gathered my notes and approached the door, his voice caught me halfway. "Natalie," he said, the weight of unspoken thoughts dragging each syllable. "We need to talk." It wasn't a command. Not this time. It was an invitation. I gave a simple nod. "Your office?" I asked. He hesitated briefly, then motioned toward the executive suite at the far end of the hallway, the office that, growing up, always felt like forbidden ground. I used to stand outside that door, listening to meetings I wasn't allowed to join, absorbing fragments of conversations about strategies, contracts, and ambitions that had no place for me. I followed him in silence. The air inside the office felt heavier than I remembered. My mother was already there, seated stiffly in one of the visitor chairs. Brandon stood by the window, arms crossed tightly, his jaw set but his eyes unsettled, the three of them together, like a familiar tribunal. I didn't sit. I stood at ease, hands clasped behind my back, steady and unapologetic. "How long have you been a lieutenant colonel?" my father asked, breaking the silence, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. 8 months. I answered without hesitation. His brow furrowed. 8 months. And you didn't tell us I did, I said quietly. I sent invitations to my promotion ceremony. I left voicemails. I forwarded the official announcement emails. None of you responded. He opened his mouth as if to defend himself, but my mother spoke first, her voice trembling slightly. We didn't understand what it meant. Colonel sounded high, but we didn't realize it was this. You didn't ask. I said, my tone calm, but the truth landed with weight. You didn't ask what it meant. You didn't ask about me. My mother's eyes shimmered, her fingers tightening around the strap of her purse. We thought you were just moving from base to base, like you were stuck, that you'd never really go anywhere. Brandon shifted uncomfortably by the window but found his voice. When I said yesterday that people in the military just follow orders, I didn't know you were doing this. I didn't know you were leading anything. You never asked, I said again, letting the repetition hang between us. Silence filled the room, thick and necessary. They weren't used to confronting the spaces they had left empty between us. They weren't used to realizing they had been absent in ways they never intended to measure. My mother's voice softened, almost a whisper. We should have been there, at your commissioning, at your graduation, all of it. I thought you were pushing us away. I met her gaze steadily. No. I just stopped hoping you would show up. My father's throat tightened as he cleared it, but his words came slower now, with less certainty, less armor. So what do you want now? Do you want a public acknowledgement, an apology? Do you want us to tell the company how proud we are? I shook my head. I want nothing more than what I've always deserved. Respect. For my work. For my choices. For the life I've built outside your blueprint. Brandon's arms loosened at his sides. You evaluated me today, he said quietly. You didn't humiliate me. You could have, but you didn't. I wasn't there to, I replied. I was doing my job. He nodded, a slow, genuine movement that I wasn't sure he had ever made toward me before. It was impressive. You were commanding. It was perhaps the first real compliment I had ever heard from him. My father finally stood, but he didn't step closer. He studied me for a long moment, as though trying to map this version of me onto the daughter he had refused to see. His voice dropped lower, rougher, but without its usual edge. You've built something we don't understand, he said, his throat tightening around the admission. That's on us. We thought we knew better. We didn't. And then he did something I never expected. He extended his hand not as a gesture of power, not as a performance, but as something I recognized from every military promotion I'd ever witnessed, a quiet offering of respect. Colonel Pierce, he said, his voice thick but steady. I owe you an apology. I underestimated you completely. I took his hand, firm and without bitterness. I accept. My mother blinked rapidly, then rose from her chair, cautiously hopeful. We'd like to try again. If you'll let us, one step at a time. I said, for the first time, I believe that might actually be possible. one step at a time. That was what I told them. And surprisingly, they kept showing up. 6 months later, they arrived at my apartment in Seattle this time for me. Not for Brandon. It was the first time I'd ever hosted them in my own space. The first time they came not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. There was no grand announcement, no corporate celebration waiting just dinner, on my ground. My apartment was quiet but full, modest yet carefully arranged. The open-plan living room overlooked the downtown skyline, its clean lines and soft lighting a reflection of the life I had built disciplined, deliberate, but finally mine. Dad was the first to arrive, holding something carefully in his hands. He glanced around the apartment as if seeing a different version of me in the neat shelves, the sparse but intentional decor, the military commendations discreetly placed among cybersecurity journals on my bookshelf. I expected him to say something about the space, about how different it felt from the house I grew up in. Instead, he handed me a framed article. "Thought you might want a copy?" he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I took the frame and studied it. It was a feature from a national defense journal, headlined "Bright Shield Milestone Strategic Success," led by Colonel Pierce and General Thomas. The photograph showed me standing in full uniform, side by side with General Thomas, shaking hands with senior defense executives. It was a moment I had long since moved past, but seeing it here framed, carefully protected, made something shift inside me. "I've had it hanging in my office for a few months now," Dad added, almost awkwardly. "Didn't seem right to leave it out." "Thanks, Dad," I said, and I meant it. It did mean something. A few minutes later, Mom arrived, cradling a covered dish in both hands. "It's lasagna," she said, a little breathless, a little unsure. "Your favorite." "Right, I thought I remembered." "You did," I said softly. And she had. For the first time, she had remembered something about me. Not because it was convenient, not because it was expected, but because she wanted to. She glanced around the apartment, taking in the order, the simplicity. "I don't know how you keep it so clean." I almost answered with a joke about military habit, but something told me to let the moment stand as it was. She was trying. It didn't need commentary. Brandon and Michelle arrived last, bringing an expensive bottle of wine that I actually liked this time. Brandon seemed lighter somehow, less guarded, less perched on the pedestal he'd always been handed. After dinner, as we cleared dishes and the conversation settled into comfortable quiet, he pulled me aside. "I implemented that rollout framework you recommended," he admitted, almost sheepishly. "Took a bit of convincing, but it's working, really working." "Did you tell them where you got it?" I asked, my arms loosely crossed. He grinned. "Eventually. I let them think I was brilliant for about 5 minutes first." I smirked. "As long as it's working." "It is," he said, his voice a little softer now. "And so are you. You've got it all together." "I don't think I ever said that." "No, you didn't." "Well, I'm saying it now." Across the room, I caught a glimpse of Dad lingering near my bookshelf. His eyes paused over one of the medals on the top shelf, the Defense Cyber Excellence citation from the operation where we intercepted and neutralized a major foreign breach attempt. He lifted the frame slightly, reading the small plaque beneath it. "I remember this incident," he said quietly. "It was in the news. I didn't realize you were leading that mission." I replied simply. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. He just nodded, a small but honest acknowledgement that didn't come with disclaimers or qualifications. No parade, no grand gesture, just quiet recognition. After dinner, as we lingered over coffee and the lasagna that Mom insisted on packing into containers for me, Dad raised his glass. "To Colonel Natalie Pierce," he said, steady and deliberate, "who proved that your worth isn't measured by following someone else's path, but by walking your own." We all raised our glasses. I looked around that room and saw something I had never seen growing up: recognition. Not pity, not polite tolerance, real, earned respect. And in that moment, I understood something I had spent years chasing. The victory wasn't in them finally seeing me. It was in the truth that I would have kept going, even if they never did. I raised my glass with them that evening, but somewhere deep inside, I knew the real moment had already passed. Their recognition had arrived, finally. But the weight I once placed on it had already dissolved. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate it. I did. I felt their sincerity. I saw their quiet attempts to bridge the distance they had spent years building. But the urgency I once carried, the desperate need for them to see me, to validate me, had quietly slipped away. It was no longer the destination I was running toward. It was simply a point I had already crossed without realizing. The truth had settled in me long before they ever caught up. I spent the next few weeks moving between assignments, handling project transitions, training new officers, overseeing the next phase of the defense program. Life didn't pause for acknowledgments. It moved forward, just as I had learned to. In quiet moments, I would return to those memories, the ones that used to sting, the empty chairs at my commissioning, the unanswered calls, the dinners where I sat invisible at the edges while the spotlight always found Brandon. I could replay those moments now with a strange softness. They no longer pierced me. They no longer defined me. What I had once viewed as rejection had simply been misalignment. I was walking a path they weren't prepared to understand, and that was never my burden to carry. There is something profoundly freeing in realizing you no longer need to be chosen by the people you once longed for. I had spent years waiting to be picked, to be seen, to be brought into the circle of their pride. But I built something outside that circle, a life, a reputation, a place I didn't have to fight for because I had carved it with my own hands. What they failed to see didn't diminish its worth. What they finally saw didn't increase it. My value had always been intact. I had simply outgrown the need for their confirmation. When people ask me now about my family, I tell them the truth we've rebuilt, slowly. There are still gaps, still echoes of old patterns, but there's also effort, and in that, there is peace. But even if they had never come to the table, even if they had never offered the belated recognition, I know I would have kept going. I would have continued to build, to lead, to rise not out of spite, but out of respect for myself. The person I have become doesn't stand as proof for anyone else. She stands because she earned the right to. Sometimes I walk by the framed article my father gave me. It sits on a quiet shelf now, not as a trophy, but as a marker of where I've been. I don't linger there. I don't trace the edges. It's not a shrine. It's just a piece of the story, a story that no longer revolves around who clapped for me and who didn't. There's a different kind of power in learning that you don't need to prove yourself to anyone. Your work, your integrity, your presence, that's the proof. That's the declaration. If someone doubts you, let them. If someone dismisses you, let them. You don't have to explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. The strongest statement you can ever make is to keep moving forward without needing their permission, because real value doesn't demand recognition. It exists with or without applause. The chair they never offered me is no longer one I'm waiting to sit in. I've built my own. I've sat in boardrooms they never imagined I could enter. I've signed approvals they never thought would bear my name. And I've come home to quiet spaces that I've filled not with the noise of needing to be seen, but with the steady rhythm of becoming someone I can stand beside. I know now I am not here to prove anyone wrong. I am here because I belong. The path I've chosen isn't something I need to defend. It's simply the one I've claimed. That is enough. I stood by the window of my apartment, the city lights flickering softly in the distance, their hum steady and indifferent. The framed article remained on the shelf behind me, a quiet souvenir of a war I no longer needed to fight. I picked up my coat, feeling its familiar weight settle over my shoulders. I glanced once more around the room, not to hold on to anything, but to acknowledge what I had built, what I had chosen. Then, without hesitation, I walked to the door, turned the handle, and stepped out. Behind me, the door closed firm, final, and beautifully quiet. Because true worth does not wait for recognition, and dignity cannot be taken.